Calcutta, 1953. A man who once ruled lecture halls now lies on a hard prison bed, his chest tightening with every breath. He was the youngest vice-chancellor of one of Asia's greatest universities, and now he's just prisoner number 247. Outside, the world knows him as a traitor or a hero. Inside this locked room, he has no idea that he has only 44 days left to live. And at the other end of this story, waiting like a shadow, stands his greatest rival, the Prime Minister of the country he helped to build. To understand how Syama Prasad Mukherjee ends up here, arrested by his own government, you have to go right back to the heat, the dust, and the noise of early 20th century Calcutta, because this is not just a story of a politician, it's the story of a shy boy born into power who grows up to challenge everyone who gave it to him. Calcutta, 1901. Trams ring their bells through streets filled with horse-drawn carriages and barefoot laborers. On one of those streets, behind a heavy wooden door and high walls, a newborn boy cries for the first time. He is named Syama Prasad. He is born into one of the mightiest Bengali families of the time. His father is Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee, barrister, jurist, mathematician, and the iron-willed vice-chancellor of the University of Calcutta. Newspapers will call him the Tiger of Bengal. When white British officials try to pressure him, he stands his ground with such ferocity that they believe he is more dangerous than a dozen agitators. Inside that house, the young Syama grows up in the long shadow of that tiger. Books line the walls. Latin grammars sit next to Sanskrit scriptures. British law reports next to volumes of Bankim Chandra and Rabindranath Tagore. Even at breakfast, the talk is of courts, legislation, the future of Bengal, the insult of colonial rule. And there, between towering piles of paper and the rustle of legal documents, a quiet boy watches everything. He is not loud. He is not the kind who slams his fist on the table like his father. But he has the same eyes, sharp, alert, missing nothing. He starts school at Mitra Institution in Bhawanipur, carrying books twice as thick as his arms. The teachers know who he is the minute they see his surname. "You're Sir Ashutosh's son," they say. The expectations are a weight on his shoulders from day one, but the boy doesn't complain. Instead, he reads. He reads late into the night under dim lamps, English classics, Bengali poetry, newspapers, legal speeches. He memorizes verses, argues with editorials in his own head, and quietly builds a mind like a steel trap. In the schoolyard, other boys play. He joins them sometimes, but his real battlefield is the examination paper. When results are announced, his name appears at the top, again and again. Yet even here another presence presses in. Whenever he shines, people nod approvingly and then say, "Of course, he's Sir Ashutosh's boy." Success for him comes with an invisible asterisk. By the time he reaches Presidency College, the intellectual nerve center of Calcutta, the city itself is changing. Nationalist posters appear on street corners. Secret leaflets are passed in student hostels. Names like Aurobindo, Chittaranjan Das, and Gandhi hang in the air like distant thunder. Inside lecture halls, professors quote Shakespeare and Macaulay, training Indians to serve an empire. Outside, in coffee houses, students whisper about revolution. Syama is caught in the middle of these two worlds. On the one hand, he is the perfect colonial-era academic, sharp, disciplined, excelling in English literature. On the other, he watches his classmates slip away to secret meetings, arrested, exiled, or simply vanish. He earns his Bachelor of Arts in English in 1921, with distinction. But while others plunge headlong into street politics, he hesitates. Not because he doesn't care about India, but because, in his mind, another weapon seems more powerful than bombs and marches, the university itself. He has grown up seeing how his father uses education as a fortress against colonial arrogance, reforming curricula, encouraging Indian languages, resisting British interference. For Syama, ideas are not an escape from politics. They are politics. At home, a different kind of pressure is building. His father is aging. The famous tiger still intimidates judges and officials, but his face is lined, his health fragile. On evenings when the humid Calcutta air hangs heavy, Ashutosh coughs, leans back in his chair, and watches his son with a question in his eyes. Will you take this fight forward? By now, Syama has completed his master's degree in Bengali and has plunged into law, enrolling to become an advocate at the Calcutta High Court. In 1924, he finally steps into the courtroom, black gown over his shoulders, the ceiling fans whirring overhead, British judges staring down from the bench. He argues calmly, precisely, his voice steady. Unlike fiery nationalist lawyers known for dramatic speeches, he cuts through facts like a surgeon, but the law for him is not a performance. It is a discipline, a method of thinking. Then, in the same year, a sudden blow. Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee dies. The Tiger of Bengal is gone. Newspapers run black borders. Professors, students, politicians crowd into the house, offering their condolences. And in the center of that storm stands a 23-year-old Syama, his father's name now not just a shield but a burden fully landed on his shoulders. The man who had defined his world, who had been his first rival, his model, his judge, is no longer there to watch him. If he wants to step out of that shadow, he will have to do it alone. Here, the story could have gone a very different way. He could have buried himself in legal practice, earning money, living quietly as thousands of lawyers did under the Raj. Instead, something strange happens. Within just a few years of his father's death, Syama plunges deeper into the world that Ashutosh dominated, Calcutta University. He becomes a member of its syndicate, its senate, the inner circles where decisions are made about who will teach, what will be taught, and in which language young Indians will think, but this is no smooth inheritance. There are people at the university who hated his father's stubborn independence. To them, the idea of the son stepping into his shoes is intolerable. In back rooms, they grumble. He is young. He is untested. He rides only on his father's name. And beyond the university walls, a much more dangerous tension is growing. In Calcutta's crowded lanes, Hindu and Muslim neighborhoods live side by side, but the line between them is becoming sharper. Separate electorates, political competition, suspicion, little sparks are beginning to fly. The British, of course, watch this with cold satisfaction. A divided India is a manageable India. Into this unstable landscape walks a young academic with a legal mind and a family name that opens doors but also paints a target on his back. Somewhere else in Bengal, another young man is rising, Hussain Shahid Suhrawardy. Like Syama, he is a lawyer, educated, ambitious. Unlike Syama, he moves easily in the world of mass politics, building networks, charming crowds, aligning with the Muslim League. Where Syama spends evenings over books and committee reports, Suhrawardy thrives in the smoky air of political negotiations. Their paths at first barely cross, but their destinies are moving towards a collision course. Two Bengalis, two visions for the same land. The rivalry isn't open yet. Not a duel, not a direct face-off. But the outline of a competitor is forming, one who will later fight for a very different future for Bengal than the one Syama imagines. In 1922, amid studies and growing responsibilities, Syama marries Sudha Devi. It is a stable, traditional match. She brings not political fire, but emotional anchor. They will eventually have 5 children, 3 sons and 2 daughters. But domestic peace does not shield him from the roar of the outside world. In the late 1920s, as Gandhi's non-cooperation movement shakes the British Empire, Bengal's politics enter a new phase. The Bengal Legislative Council, a semi-elected, heavily limited body under colonial control, becomes the stage where Indian leaders test the edges of their influence. In 1929, to the surprise of many, Syama Prasad Mukherjee is elected to this council. He is not a street agitator. He is not a fiery orator like Subhas Chandra Bose. Yet now he sits in the same chamber where powerful zamindars, British officials, and sharp-tongued nationalists battle over budgets, language policies, and constitutional reforms. Once again, the whispers start. It's his father's reputation. Another Mukherjee in public life? Let's see what the boy can do. Inside the council, surrounded by older, louder men, Syama listens more than he speaks. He weighs every word, every proposal, every hidden implication, and slowly something changes in him. Education can shape minds, yes, but these council debates, they shape the rules of the game. He begins to see that if he confines himself only to classrooms and committees, he will be playing too small a role in a battle that is already growing larger and more vicious than anything his father faced. The 1930s fall like a hammer on Bengal. Economic crisis shreds what little security villages and cities had. Tens of thousands struggle for food. Unemployment explodes. Political movements grow more desperate, more radical. In 1932, British repression deepens. Many Congress leaders are in jail. But if one part of India's leadership is behind bars, another is quietly, steadily advancing, the communal parties. In Bengal, the line between Hindu and Muslim is no longer simply about faith. It is about land, jobs, representation, survival. This is the world in which Syama moves, half as academic and half as politician, feeling the ground under his feet begin to split. Then comes the twist no one saw coming. In 1934, at just 33 years old, he is appointed Vice-Chancellor of the University of Calcutta, the youngest man ever to hold the post. For his supporters, this is destiny fulfilled. The son of Ashutosh now sits in the same chair, signs the same documents, commands the same institution. For his enemies inside and outside the university, it is intolerable. How can this boy lead one of the greatest universities of the East? He is a political plant. He will turn the campus into a nationalist fortress. The pressure is immediate. British officials watch suspiciously. Conservative Indian elites fear change. On top of all this, the growing Hindu-Muslim tension outside begins to echo through the corridors of the university. And here, Syama makes choices that will define not only his career, but his character. As vice-chancellor, he does what his critics least expect. Yes, he pushes for Indian languages, especially Bengali, to be given more dignity in the curriculum. Yes, he resists heavy-handed British control. But he also does something that complicates every easy label people want to put on him. He defends Muslim students and staff when he believes they are being treated unfairly. In disciplinary cases, scholarships, appointments, he insists on merit and order, not passion and revenge. He refuses to let the university become a battlefield of vengeance for wrongs done outside its walls. In one moment, he might be arguing for more space for Hindu cultural studies. In the next, he might be standing against a Hindu student group demanding the dismissal of a Muslim professor they dislike purely for communal reasons. To observers hungry for simple villains and heroes, this is frustrating. Who is this man? A nationalist? A communalist? A pragmatist? A hypocrite? But Syama is not playing to satisfy labels. He is trying, in his own way, to hold together an institution in a world that is rapidly tearing itself apart. Still, the pressure doesn't lessen. It increases. Outside the university, Bengal's politics are entering a new phase. In 1935, the Government of India Act promises more provincial autonomy. Elections are coming. Parties sharpen their knives, gather funds, and calculate votes village by village, ward by ward. The clock is ticking. Bengal, this dense, fertile, explosive province, will soon be governed by leaders chosen under this new system. Who will control it? The Congress? The Muslim League? Regional outfits? Where will Hindus stand? Where will Muslims stand? And where in all this will stand a man like Syama who straddles academia and politics? This is his time limit, whether he sees it or not. He does not have decades of calm before the storm. He has only a few short years before his province and his country begin to be irreversibly reshaped. And as the stakes rise, so does the need for clear alignment. Until now, he has cooperated with congressmen, admired certain nationalists, but refused to be entirely absorbed by any single group. He has publicly defended the idea of national unity, even while noticing harsh realities of communal tensions. But the late 1930s leave less and less space for this careful balancing act. The 1937 provincial elections are a shock to Bengal. Congress does well in many parts of India, but in Bengal the numbers fall a different way. The Krishak Praja Party, representing peasant interests, and the Muslim League, representing many Muslim elites, gain ground. Hindu representation is fragmented, scattered across factions unable to present a united front. Suddenly, what had been anxious whispers becomes a cold, hard reality. Bengal may be governed in a way that leaves large sections of its Hindu population feeling exposed, marginalized, fearful. And in the back of this emerging scenario, another figure's shadow lengthens. Hussain Shahid Suhrawardi, agile, ambitious, increasingly central to Muslim politics in Bengal. The rivalry that was once silent, theoretical, is about to become brutally, urgently real. By 1939, a new force enters Syama Prasad's life with full intensity, the Hindu Mahasabha. Until now, he has not been its poster boy. The Mahasabha, founded to protect Hindu political interests, often sharply critical of Congress's policies, has been growing in strength. Especially as communal tensions intensify, its leaders come to him with a simple, sharp message: you cannot stay in the middle forever. If you care about the future of Hindus in Bengal, you must stand clearly, firmly on one side. For a man who has spent years in the university's nuanced world, this is a dramatic turn. Join a party that openly declares itself as representing one community. Risk being branded a communalist by Congress and liberals. Risk breaking bridges with colleagues who believe in an indivisible secular nationalism. But the realities of Bengal are no longer academic. Rumors of attacks, discrimination, administrative bias, true, exaggerated, and imagined, swirl through Hindu neighborhoods. In the Muslim quarters, counter-rumors paint Hindus as exploiters, landlords, silent oppressors. Syama feels the ground shaking under his city, under his people. And slowly in this pressure cooker, a decision takes form. A decision that will turn a quiet scholar into a sharp-edged political fighter. A decision that will push him into open confrontation not only with leaders in Bengal, but eventually with the most powerful man in independent India itself. He begins to step away from the orbit of Congress. He inches closer to the Hindu Mahasabha. He sharpens his speeches. His tone, once almost purely academic, becomes more urgent, more pointed, more openly political. Some old friends fall silent when he enters the room. Others warn him discreetly, "You are playing with fire." But by now the clock is not only ticking, it is pounding. War is breaking out in Europe. British power is being stretched thin. India's political future is no longer an abstract debate. It is a question every serious leader must answer, loudly and publicly. So when the chance finally comes for him to move from vice-chancellor's desk to the actual levers of power in Bengal's government, when he is invited into the heart of a fragile, tense provincial administration, he will have to choose. Stay in the safety of academia, or step into a political arena where friends can become enemies overnight, and where one wrong move can set a province on fire. And Syama Prasad Mukherjee, the quiet boy from the shadow of the tiger of Bengal, is about to make his choice. He chooses risk, not in a burst of slogans on the street, but in the quiet scratch of a pen on paper under a yellowing lamp in his Calcutta study. The war has come. 1939. Europe is burning, and Bengal watches from across the sea. The British drag India in without asking a single Indian for permission. Congress ministries in several provinces resign in protest. But in Bengal, the game is different. Here, power is a mosaic. The Krishak Praja Party, the Muslim League, landed interests, communal blocs, and on the edges, a professor. Lawyer who can no longer pretend that university walls will hold back the storm. When leaders of the Hindu Mahasabha come to him, their message is blunt. Enough committees, enough balancing acts entered the arena. If you stay away now, you will watch Bengal being carved without you. The boy from Ashutosh Mukherjee's house finally gives a clear answer, yes. He begins to attend strategy meetings not as an observer but as a player. He drafts memoranda, negotiates alliances, reads electoral tables deep into the night. He stops being just Professor Mukherjee and starts becoming Syama Prasad, the leader. And soon Bengal will test him with a choice so twisted that even his admirers will ask, has he crossed a line? The Second World War explodes across continents and its shockwaves hit Calcutta's dockyards. Ships crowd the Hooghly. The city is a military hub, a supply line, a target. As British troops march and air raid sirens wail in the distance, politics in Bengal twists into a strange shape. In 1941, a fragile coalition ministry forms under A. K. Fazlul Huk, the peasant leader who once shouted, Banglar Hok Sarkar, Huk Suhrawardi Jar Jar, across Bengal. Huk, pressured by numbers and by the League, looks for Hindu partners to balance powerful Muslim blocs. The name that keeps coming up in hushed conversations is unexpected. Call Syama Prasad Mukherjee, a university vice-chancellor, a lawyer, not a mass agitator, and yet precisely because he is serious, disciplined, and rooted in Calcutta's elite, he is valuable. For Hindus anxious about their future in a Muslim-majority province, his presence in government is a guarantor, a shield. The offer lands on his desk like a challenge. Finance Minister of Bengal, one of the most powerful portfolios in one of India's largest provinces. Take it, and he enters the heart of the colonial-era state, calculating budgets for a British war, signing orders under a crown he ultimately wants gone. Refuse it and he stays pure but powerless. He accepts. In just a few years, he has traveled from the quiet of Senate rooms to the volcanic core of provincial government. A man who once graded answer sheets now signs wartime financial orders with British generals waiting in the next room. Here comes the twist that will haunt his reputation for decades. 1942, Gandhi launches the Quit India movement. From Bombay to Banaras, crowds shout, "Do or die." Sita. Congress calls for the British to leave immediately, even in the middle of war. Across India, ministries collapse. Leaders are thrown in jail. Violence breaks out. And in Calcutta, a Hindu Mahasabha minister in a coalition government, Syama Prasad, makes a decision that seems almost unthinkable. For a nationalist, he does not support Quit India. In fact, in his correspondence with the governor of Bengal, Sir John Herbert, he argues that the administration must not be allowed to fall apart. If Congress withdraws, he suggests, others must step in to keep the machinery running, to prevent anarchy, to protect lives. Years later, critics will hold up these letters as proof of collaboration. How could a patriot help a colonial government when the country was rising? But place yourself in his mind for a moment. He looks out at Bengal, a Muslim-majority province, a weak coalition, the specter of communal riots always on the horizon. Japanese forces advance through Burma. There is real talk of an invasion of Bengal. If the British walk out suddenly and the administration collapses, who will control Calcutta? The League? The army? The mobs? For him, keeping the government functioning is not surrender. It is a desperate attempt to buy time, to prevent a total breakdown that could devour his people. It is a cold, ruthless calculation. Better a constrained hand on the wheel than no one holding it at all. History rarely forgives such shades of gray, but Syama Prasad embraces them, believing that in a world on fire, purity is a luxury he cannot afford. The price of those calculations arrives not as a moral judgment, but as corpses. 1943, Bengal famine. In the streets of Calcutta, men once proud enough to refuse charity now lie in rags on pavements, their ribs like bamboo poles under paper-thin skin. Children with swollen bellies and stick-like arms wander from shop to shop whispering just one word, "Bhat," rice. The government, now, under a Muslim League ministry with Khwaja Nazimuddin as premier and Hussein Shahid Sohrawardi climbing steadily up through its ranks, is slow, defensive, often callous. Boats have been seized to stop a possible Japanese landing. Grain prices spiral. Traders hoard. British priorities are elsewhere. On war, on soldiers, on ships, on Europe. By conservative estimates, 2 to 3 million people die. In this nightmare, the rivalry between Suhrawardi and Syama Prasad turns from a distant political difference into something raw and personal. On one side, Suhrawardi, the brilliant League politician, already gaining a reputation as a ruthless operator, a man who knows how to use the state's machinery and when to look away. On the other, Syama, now outside the ministry, emerging as one of the fiercest critics of the League government and British neglect. He writes letters blistering with controlled rage to the viceroy. He stands in legislative debates describing scenes that make even hardened officials flinch. Villages emptied, mothers selling their last pieces of jewelry for a handful of rice, skeletal bodies stacked like firewood outside makeshift relief centers. He accuses the ministry, Suhrawardi's allies, of criminal mismanagement, of indifference so extreme that it becomes complicity. But there is something else happening beneath the words. For the first time, his politics are not confined to educated elites. He throws himself into relief work, mobilizing Hindu Mahasabha volunteers, coordinating with social workers, visiting camps where refugees from the countryside huddle in thousands. He sees at terrifying close range what administrative failure really means. Not a line in a file, but a dead child in a ditch. These images will never leave him, and they will harden him in ways that later make compromise with men like Suhrawardi and like Nehru almost impossible. By 1944, with the famine's scars still fresh, Syama Prasad steps onto the national stage. He becomes president of the All India Hindu Mahasabha. The quiet academic is now the head of a party that speaks openly, unapologetically, for Hindu political interests across India. He is not Vinayak Damodar Savarkar's copy. He is his own man. He supports industrialization, a strong center, but also insists that any talk of national unity that ignores the fears of millions of Hindus in volatile provinces like Bengal is a fantasy. The war is grinding toward its end. But another deadline is now visible on the horizon. It is only a matter of years, perhaps even months, before the British leave. The question is no longer if India will be free, but how it will be divided, politically, territorially, communally. On one side stands Muhammad Ali Jinnah demanding Pakistan. On another, Nehru and Gandhi insisting that India must remain one, even as they inch reluctantly toward accepting partition. And then there are regional players like Suhrawardi plotting their own plans, a united independent Bengal, neither in India nor Pakistan, where he and his allies would rule a sovereign state stretching from the Hooghly to the frontiers of Burma. For Hindus in Bengal, such a plan is a nightmare. A united Bengal with Muslim majorities in many districts, under leaders like Suhrawardi, who already stand accused of mishandling the famine. What would happen to them when British bayonets were gone? The clock starts ticking louder. If Bengal is partitioned, where will the line fall? If it is not, who will guarantee the safety and the dignity of millions? Syama Prasad knows he has very little time to answer these questions. August 1946, Calcutta. The humid air is thick, the monsoon clouds heavy, when the Muslim League calls for Direct Action Day, a show of strength for Pakistan. Premier H.S. Suhrawardi, now the most powerful man in Bengal's government, declares a public holiday. The administration seems to loosen its grip deliberately. Police vanish from some intersections. Orders are delayed. Rumors spread like oil on water. What follows is remembered as the Great Calcutta Killing. For 3 days, the city turns into a slaughterhouse. Shops are looted, houses set ablaze. Mobs armed with machetes, lathis, broken bottles surge through lanes and bazaars. Hindu and Muslim neighborhoods barricade themselves and then launch retaliatory raids. Bodies float in the canals. Flames light up the night sky. The smell of burning wood and burning flesh hangs over the city. Estimates of the dead run from 4,000 to 10,000. In this inferno, the abstract communal question becomes a matter of immediate survival, and the rivalry between Suhrawardi and Syama explodes into open war. Suhrawardi is blamed, by opponents and later by many historians, for allowing, even enabling, the violence by failing to control his administration. His critics whisper that he wanted to show the world what Bengal would look like if Muslims were crossed. Mukherjee is on the other side of the barricades. He spends those days racing between meetings and devastated localities, urging Hindus to organize defense, pleading for troops, telegraphing. Delhi and London demanding that the viceroy intervene, that the army be called in. He sees with his own eyes the broken skulls, the hacked limbs. He meets families who, overnight, have lost everything. When the fires finally die down, one conviction inside him is absolute. There can be no united Bengal under leaders like Suhrawardi. If partition is inevitable, then Bengal must be partitioned too. A Hindu-majority West Bengal must stay in India, whatever the cost. This is not the gentle cultural nationalism of poetry and festivals. This is politics written in blood. From late 1946 into 1947, the map of India becomes a battlefield of pens. In smoky conference rooms in Delhi, leaders lean over large colored maps of provinces, lines of districts, and rivers traced in ink. Each stroke of a pen can decide the fate of millions. Syama Prasad travels constantly, shuttling between Calcutta and Delhi, lobbying, arguing, calculating. He works with Congress leaders he has often opposed, men like Vallabhbhai Patel, to ensure that any plan for partition includes the division of Bengal. He sends memoranda to the British, to the Viceroy, to anyone who will listen. If all of Bengal is allowed to go to Pakistan or become an independent Muslim-dominated state, the Hindus of Western Bengal will be condemned to permanent second-class status or worse. Carve out West Bengal, he insists. Keep Calcutta, keep the industrial belt, keep at least one safe space for Bengal's Hindus within India. Across the table, directly or indirectly, stands Suhrawardi, fighting for his dream of a united Bengal, sometimes floating the idea of an independent, neutral Bengal open to both India and Pakistan. Every conversation, every telegram, every map revision is a duel between their visions. The deadline is brutally tight. By February 1947, British Prime Minister Clement Attlee announces that the British will leave no later than June 1948, and as it turns out, they will leave even earlier in August 1947. That gives Indian leaders barely 18 months, then just a few frantic months, to settle frontiers that will define lives for generations. With the clock running down, Syama Prasad's campaign succeeds in one core demand. The principle of partition of Bengal is accepted. There will be an East Bengal that will join Pakistan, and there will be a West Bengal that will remain in India. When he looks at the final map, it is not triumph he feels. It is something far more complicated. Relief tangled with grief. Because along that line, hastily drawn between villages and rivers, lie families that will be torn apart, temples and mosques that will become cross-border relics, markets that will lose half their customers overnight. And as trains begin to move, loaded with refugees, he knows his fight is not over. Partition on paper is only the beginning of partition on the ground. 15 August 1947, midnight, New Delhi. In a hall lit by chandeliers and camera flashes, the Constituent Assembly of India listens as Jawaharlal Nehru speaks words that will echo across the century. Long years ago, we made a tryst with destiny. The room is full of men who have spent decades in jail, men who have led marches, written manifestos, organized strikes. Among them sits Syama Prasad Mukherjee, the man who chose the council chamber over the jail cell, who stayed with the British administration when others walked out, who fought a brutal, unsentimental battle to carve out a safe corner for his province. Outside, bonfires burn in the refugee camps. On the new borders of India and Pakistan, trains arrive at stations filled only with corpses. Inside this hall, India is being born, and a new chapter in his rivalry is about to begin. Because Nehru, the elegant Western-educated socialist with a powerful global image, has chosen to do something that surprises many. He invites Syama Prasad Mukherjee into the first cabinet of independent India, the former Hindu Mahasabha president, the fierce critic of Congress compromises, is offered the portfolio of industry and supply, one of the ministries that will shape the economic skeleton of the new state. It is a move of inclusion or of calculation. Bring your sharpest critics into the room, give them responsibility, make them share the burden. For Syama, it is the highest office he has ever held. He now sits at the same table as Nehru, Sardar Patel, Maulana Azad, and others who will be written into history books as the architects of modern India. But even as he takes the oath, even as he begins to sign files that will decide where steel plants rise and where coal is shipped, another clock has started ticking. From this moment, he has less than 3 years before he will walk out of Nehru's cabinet in protest. Less than 6 years before he will stand in direct, open confrontation with the very government he is now part of. Less than a decade before he will die in a prison cell, watching his greatest rival's shadow fall across the country he helped create. For now, though, he has entered the heart of power. The shy boy from Bhawanipur, the vice-chancellor in a black academic gown, the provincial minister fighting famine and riots, all those selves converge into one man seated at a long table in Delhi, pen in hand, preparing to shape the destiny of a free India. He has finally reached the summit, and on the other side of that polished table, smiling faintly, eyes hooded, sits the man who will one day be his greatest political opponent, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. The contrast is almost obscene. One night he is sitting under crystal chandeliers in New Delhi, a cabinet minister of a newborn nation, his signature sending ripples through factories, coalfields, ports. In less than 6 years, he will lie on a hard cot in a prison hospital in Kashmir, staring at a cracked ceiling, his heart faltering, his questions unanswered. Between those two rooms runs a single tightening thread: his fight with Jawaharlal Nehru over what India should be, and the race against time to leave a mark before the clock stops. The first days in independent India's cabinet feel like controlled chaos. Refugee trains scream into station after station, Howrah, Sealdah, Old Delhi, their paint streaked with dried blood and mud. Camps mushroom on city edges, bamboo poles and tarpaulin flapping in hot winds. The currency is unstable, food is scarce. Industry is shattered by war. And in the middle of that storm sits Syama Prasad Mukherjee, now Minister for Industry and Supply. It is not a glamorous portfolio. It is a battlefield of shortages. Coal for trains, steel for bridges. Cement for houses for millions who have lost everything. Cloth, kerosene, edible oil, basic medicines. Every bottle, every sack, every wagon must be tracked, rationed, redirected. On his desk, the files do not speak in abstractions. They speak in numbers that translate directly into survival. How many wagons of coal must move from Asansol to Tatanagar this week, or furnaces go dark? How much steel can be diverted to build new factories without starving the railways of spare parts? How many grains of wheat can be squeezed out of shrinking stocks before riots begin? He moves through these questions like a man navigating a minefield with a stopwatch ticking in his ear, because there is another deadline looming. India is writing its constitution, racing to become a full republic by January 26, 1950. Before that day, this chaotic, bleeding country must not only survive, it must look as if it can stand on its own feet. Nehru dreams of a planned socialistic economy, of heavy industry, dams, and steel framing a modern republic. Mukherjee does not oppose planning, but he is instinctively wary of state control turning into suffocating bureaucracy. He wants industry, yes, but he also wants initiative, national pride in production, and a clear prioritization of those on the brink. Day after day, his ministry works at a pace that would crush a weaker man. He helps push through the creation of new institutions, the Industrial Finance Corporation of India to fund factories when private. Capital is too scared. The Tariff Commission to protect fragile Indian industries from being drowned by imports, early groundwork, for power and steel projects that will later blossom into the Damodar Valley schemes and heavy engineering plants. They are technical achievements buried under jargon. But without them, Nehru's towering visions would have stood on sand. And yet, while he drafts industrial policy by day, Bengal haunts his nights. Because from the east, new trains are still arriving, filled with faces he recognizes even if he has never seen them before, the Hindus. Of East Bengal, now East Pakistan, fleeing violence, intimidation, slow suffocation. He visits camps in Calcutta, Barakpur, Jadavpur. He listens to stories of forced conversions, looted homes, missing daughters. He sees men twice his age standing in line for a ladle of watery dal, their eyes hollow. The boy who once argued about constitutional clauses in Calcutta drawing rooms now hears just one question, again and again. Will anyone speak for us in Delhi? He decides that answer must be yes. Inside the Constituent Assembly, where the Constitution is being hammered out clause by clause, Mukherjee is not the loudest voice, but when he rises, the hall listens. He argues for a strong center. India, he insists, cannot afford to fragment again, not after partition. But his nationalism is colored by the wounds of Bengal. He warns that unity built on ignoring the fears of large communities will be fragile, dishonest. On minority rights, he takes a line that baffles some of his critics. He supports protections for Muslims and other minorities in India, but he demands reciprocity for Hindus in Pakistan. If Nehru's diplomacy keeps reassuring the world that India is secular and just, then, Mukherjee says, that moral language must be used as a lever on Pakistan as well. Do not turn the exodus from East Bengal into a statistic, he pleads. Every day we look away, more families cross a border with nothing but a bundle of clothes and a tin trunk. His speeches are not just constitutional arguments. They are letters from a frontier most of Delhi prefers not to see. Nehru listens. Sometimes he nods. Sometimes his face tightens almost imperceptibly, because for him there is a different clock ticking. India must stabilize, win global respect, avoid another war with Pakistan, court both the West and the Soviet bloc in a Cold War world. He believes that constantly foregrounding the plight of Hindus in East Pakistan risks inflaming passions, risking fresh riots, wrecking fragile diplomacy. Slowly, almost invisibly, a fault line opens between the two men. They sit at the same table, sign the same cabinet decisions, stand together on Independence Day platforms. But behind closed doors, in letters and late-night meetings, their visions clash. Nehru wants a nation that transcends communal wounds as swiftly as possible. Mukherjee wants a nation that remembers them, honors them, and refuses to paper them over with platitudes. At first, these are just differences inside a government. Then the refugees become too many to ignore. By 1949, the trickle from East Pakistan has become a stream, and in many districts, a flood. Villages near the new border empty out overnight. Camps around Calcutta overflow. Local officials beg Delhi for more grain, more cloth, more money. Mukherjee's files as industry minister now contain refugee statistics, complaints about discrimination, desperate appeals from West Bengal MLAs. He fires off note after note to Nehru. This cannot go on. We promised people safety. We cannot let our borders become a one-way street of despair. Press Pakistan harder. Secure a real enforceable guarantee of minority protection. Nehru replies with patience that is gradually edged with irritation. He believes in negotiation, in high-level agreements, in the hope that Pakistan's leaders can be persuaded to behave reasonably. Mukherjee believes the evidence on the ground says otherwise. The tension snaps around a document that, on paper, looks like a triumph. The Nehru-Liaquat Pact of April 1950, signed between Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru of India and Prime Minister Liaquat Ali Khan of Pakistan, it promises mutual protection of minorities, restoration of looted property, a halt to forced conversions, confidence-building measures. In London and Washington, it is praised as statesmanship. In Delhi, many heave a sigh of relief. In refugee camps in Bengal, the reaction is more complicated. Men who have seen their relatives killed or kidnapped listen to the news on crackling radios and ask quietly, and if they don't follow this pact, what then? Who will go back and bring back our dead? For Mukherjee, this is the breaking point. He believes the pact is too little, too late, too weakly enforced, too trusting of a state that has already failed its minorities. He fears that holding it up as a grand solution will provide cover for inaction while more people are driven out. He goes to Nehru. In cabinet meetings, in private conversations, he argues, pushes, pleads, strengthen the pact with firm guarantees, with monitoring, with teeth. Do not ask the refugees to trust vague promises from the same authorities they are fleeing. Do not downplay their suffering to protect India's international image. Nehru, under pressure from every side, holds his line. India must move on, he insists. We cannot live forever in the shadow of fear and suspicion. For the first time since 1947, Mukherjee faces a choice as stark as the one he confronted during the war. Stay in power and swallow what he believes is a fatal mistake, or walk out and lose access to the levers that actually move policy. This time, he chooses the opposite path. In April 1950, Syama Prasad Mukherjee resigns from Nehru's cabinet. The newspapers carry the story, but in the crowded columns of that turbulent year, it is one headline among many. Yet for him, it is another personal partition. He walks out of the room where decisions about steel mills and river dams are being taken and steps instead into a world of dusty, made in rallies, pamphlets, and protest resolutions. He abandons the prestige of a cabinet minister for the uncertainty of opposition. It is a twist that astonishes even some of his friends. Why throw away so much power? They ask. He answers in words and by his actions that a chair in government is not worth the price of losing the right to speak without calculation. Now begins the phase that will etch his face and his name into the memory of the Indian right for decades. He returns to Bengal not as a minister with a convoy, but as a campaigner, traveling in crowded trains, sometimes sitting on wooden benches in smoky village schools, sometimes standing on makeshift platforms hammered together from crates. Refugees surround him wherever he goes. They show him ration cards that never yield food, rehabilitation promises that never translate into land or jobs. They point to their children playing barefoot in mud and ask, "Is this what we were supposed to build by leaving everything behind?" He raises his voice, not as a technocrat, but as an agitator. He demands better treatment for the displaced, stronger pressure on Pakistan, more resources for border states stretched to breaking point. In Delhi, Nehru watches this reemergence with mixed feelings. Here is a former colleague turning into a national-level critic, channeling anger that could easily slip into a majoritarian rage he fears. There is another complication. The shadow of Gandhi's assassination in 1948 still hangs heavy. The Hindu Mahasabha, which Mukherjee once headed, is widely blamed in the public mind for creating the climate that produced Nathuram Godse, even though Mukherjee himself condemned the murder. Staying within the Mahasabha would be political suicide for anyone who wants a broader appeal. Mukherjee understands this. If he wants to build a force capable of actually contending for power, he cannot simply be the refined face of a tainted organization. He has to create something new, something that can gather traditionalists, nationalists, disillusioned congressmen, urban traders, refugees, and the disciplined cadre of the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, under one banner. Time again is his enemy. Because India is marching toward its first general elections scheduled for 1951-52, That gives him barely a year and a half to birth a party and turn it into a recognizable force on the ballot. It is an almost impossible deadline. He accepts it. In October 1951, in Delhi, under bare bulbs and clouds of cigarette smoke, a small group of men gather. They come from different strands of the nationalist right. Former Hindu Mahasabha workers, some ex-congressmen, RSS organizers, young lawyers, and teachers. At the center sits Syama Prasad Mukherjee. On the table lies a simple but audacious proposal. A new political party, national in scope, committed to cultural nationalism, economic self-reliance, and an unambiguous stand on national unity and borders. They call it the Bharatiya Janasangh. Mukherjee becomes its first president. No treasury benches, no official bungalows, no government cars. Only a name, a flag, and the fierce conviction that India needs an alternative to Congress that is not tainted by memories of collaboration with the British, nor paralyzed by guilt over Gandhi's death. From that moment, his life becomes a blur of travel. He takes third-class compartments, sits up nights on wooden seats, writes speeches by the light of kerosene lamps in wayside stations. He addresses tiny gatherings in remote towns, sometimes speaking to 50 people, sometimes to 5,000. The contrast with Nehru could not be sharper. While the Prime Minister flies to global conferences, addresses parliaments abroad, is photographed with world leaders, Mukherjee trudges through small lanes laced with open drains, shaking hands with shopkeepers, arguing late into the night with college students. Both men are chasing legitimacy, one on the world stage, one in the local bazaar. The countdown to the elections is relentless. Posters must be printed, candidates found, manifestos written. Every rupee must be begged or scraped together. The Janasangh is a minnow in a sea dominated by Congress, but Mukherjee campaigns as if victory is within reach. When the results finally come, reality is cruel and instructive. In the 1951-52 elections, Congress sweeps the country. Janasangh wins just 3 seats in the Lok Sabha. One of them is Calcutta Southeast, Syama Prasad's own constituency. He walks into Parliament not as a cabinet colleague, but as a leader of a tiny opposition, facing Nehru across the aisle instead of along the same row. It is Congress's hour of glory, yet in that vast hall a new duel is about to begin. Parliament gives Mukherjee the stage he was born for. All his past lives converge here. The professor who can dissect an argument word by word, the lawyer who can reduce a complex case to a sharp, undeniable point, the administrator who knows how files move, where power really lies. He uses question hour like a scalpel. On refugees, he hammers the government with numbers they would rather bury. On economic policy, he warns that an over-centralized state sector could become a lumbering giant that crushes individual enterprise. On foreign affairs, he warns against a sentimental approach to Pakistan and China, but it is on one issue that his voice rises from sharpness to fire: Kashmir. Since 1947, the princely state of Jammu and Kashmir has had a special position: its own constitution, its own flag, its own prime minister rather than a chief minister, and a permit system preventing Indian citizens from entering freely. Article 370 of the Indian Constitution has wrapped this arrangement in dense legal language, but the political message is simple: Kashmir is not like other parts of India. For Nehru, this is a necessary temporary compromise to honor promises made to Kashmiri leaders and manage a dangerous border with Pakistan. For Mukherjee, it is a knife pointed at the idea of one indivisible nation. He asks in Parliament, how can there be 2 constitutions, 2 flags, 2 heads of government in one country? How can I, an Indian citizen, need a permit to travel to a part of India? From these questions comes the slogan that will echo for decades: Ek desh mein do vidhan, do pradhan, do nishan, nahin challenge. In one country, 2 constitutions, 2 prime ministers, 2 flags. This will not do. In Jammu, discontent is already simmering. The Hindu-majority region feels marginalized by the Srinagar-based leadership of Sheikh Abdullah. Local leaders form the Praja Parishad, demanding full integration of Jammu and Kashmir with India. Mukherjee sees in them both an ally and a cause. He throws himself into their agitation, turning a regional movement into a national campaign. Rallies erupt across North India. Posters show a map of India with Kashmir shaded, separated, with a question mark over it. Students march with the tricolor, shouting that one nation must have one constitution, one flag, one head of government. Nehru is furious. From his perspective, the agitation is reckless, playing with fire in a border state already half-claimed by Pakistan, undermining delicate negotiations with Sheikh Abdullah, risking internationalizing the dispute. He writes letters, public and private, attacking the Jana Sang's campaign as irresponsible, communal, dangerous. Mukherjee replies with calm ferocity, "Is it irresponsible to demand that Indian citizens should be able to go to Indian territory without being treated as foreigners? Is it dangerous to insist that the flag that flies in Delhi must fly in Srinagar as well?" The rivalry between the two men, once a muted argument inside cabinet files, has become open, ideological warfare. But arguments, Mukherjee feels, are no longer enough. If he really believes that the permit system in Kashmir is an insult to Indian citizenship, then what is he doing sitting in Delhi, sending telegrams and giving speeches? There comes a point where a man who has lived by the pen must decide whether he is willing to risk his body. That point arrives in 1953. By now, he is exhausted. Years of overwork, insomnia, endless travel, and the emotional toll of constant confrontation have carved themselves into his face. Friends and doctors urge him to rest, to slow down. He ignores them. Because the situation in Kashmir is, in his eyes, reaching a now-or-never moment. Sheikh Abdullah is talking ever more openly of plebiscite, of a special path for Kashmir, of not bowing to pressure from Delhi. Pakistan is watching, waiting for any crack to widen. In Srinagar, some wave the Indian tricolor. Others whispered different slogans at night. Mukherjee is convinced if the special status of Kashmir is not challenged now, it will become permanent. If no one is willing to test the permit system with their own body, it will continue as an ugly fact papered over with legal phrases. He calls his colleagues. "I will go to Jammu and then to Srinagar," he says, "without a permit. As an Indian in my own country, they are stunned. It is not a symbolic risk. The state government has made it clear anyone entering without authorization can be arrested. The journey will be long and physically draining. The Nehru government in Delhi will wash its hands of responsibility. Time presses on him from every side. Jana Sang is still small. If he is sidelined or worse, the party might wither. His health is fragile. Another year like the last may break him anyway. The special arrangement in Kashmir is hardening by the month. He chooses movement over waiting. In May 1953, he leaves Delhi. No ministerial convoy, no security cordon. Just a determined, aging yet still intense man, with files and clothes in a modest suitcase, boarding a train that will take him north, toward the mountains, toward a border wrapped in barbed wire and laws, toward a confrontation he knows could end in prison, or worse. He steps onto the platform, adjusts his spectacles, and walks toward his compartment. He believes he is going to challenge a law. He does not know that he is also walking into the last chapter of his life, with barely 70 days left on his unseen clock. At the very moment the train whistle screams and the wheels begin to grind forward, the line between citizen and prisoner is already dissolving. He thinks he is crossing a border inside his own country to prove a point. In less than 2 weeks, that same country will lock him in a small room behind barbed wire, under a foreign law, inside its own map. Freedom, for which he once sat in a British jail, will now be denied to him by independent India itself. The journey to Jammu is long, jolting, and strangely intimate. There is no entourage of officials, no fuss. In the compartment, a thermos of tea, a battered leather bag, a rolled-up shawl against the mountain chill. Outside the windows, the plains give way to rising hills, fields thinning into rocky slopes. At stations along the way, word has gone ahead. Syama Prasad Mukherjee is coming, not as a minister, not as a professor or a lawyer, but as a challenger to a law his own government helped preserve. Crowds press against the carriage doors. Some hold up the tricolor, some the Jana Sang flag. Refugees from Jammu and displaced families from West Punjab jostle forward, shouting, "Take our voice to Kashmir! End this permit raj." He steps down for a few minutes at one dusty platform. A young man, no more than 20, grabs his hand with both of his. "Panditji, if even you don't go," he says, voice shaking, "who will?" Mukherjee looks at him through tired, reddened eyes and answers quietly, "If a permit is needed to go to any part of India, then the freedom we won in 1947 is incomplete." He climbs back into the train. The young man watches the carriage pull away until it is a speck of iron and smoke in the distance. The real line is not a line on the ground. It is a checkpoint of humiliation. At Lakhanpur, the entry point into Jammu and Kashmir, the atmosphere is taut. Policemen in khaki, files stacked on wooden tables, the smell of dust, sweat, and carbon paper. Every Indian must show a permit to enter. As if crossing into another country, Mukherjee steps forward without one. Officials, already warned of his arrival, move swiftly. There is a flurry of telephone calls, an exchange of stiff words, a brief attempt at persuasion. "Panditji, please don't make it difficult. This is the law here. You can always protest from Delhi." He refuses, calmly but unbendably. "I am not here as a supplicant," he says. "I am an Indian citizen entering a part of India. If that is a crime, then arrest me." They do. On 11 May 1953, Syama Prasad Mukherjee is detained under the Jammu and Kashmir Public Safety Act and taken into custody. A man who once sat at the cabinet table now sits in the back of a police jeep, jolting along mountain roads, his face framed not by ministerial files but by rifle barrels and the jagged silhouettes of deodar trees against a bleeding orange sunset. The rival whose policies he is defying, Jawaharlal Nehru, is hundreds of kilometers away in Delhi. Reading reports that mix legal procedure with political danger, Nehru knows this arrest will make headlines. He also believes deeply that allowing Mukherjee to roam freely in Kashmir, stirring agitation, would be reckless. Two men, two calculations. One trusts institutions and gradual compromise. The other trusts confrontation and personal risk. Both now depend on how long the other can hold his nerve. In Srinagar, Mukherjee is lodged first in the central jail and then in a small bungalow-cum detention facility ringed with barbed wire and watchmen. The room is plain: a simple cot, a wooden table, a chair, a small bookshelf with a few volumes of scripture and law, a jug of water. Outside the window, the world is terrifyingly beautiful. Snow-capped peaks, a pale sky, the distant shimmer of the Dal Lake. He wakes to the call of the muezzin, the rustle of poplar leaves, the crunch of guards' boots on gravel. He is 52, but his body has been aged by years of untreated stress. He suffers from respiratory issues, occasional chest pain. The altitude and damp chill of Srinagar do him no favors. Yet his mind is restless, unyielding. He writes letters to his mother in Calcutta, to Jana Sangh colleagues, to Nehru. To Nehru he writes with a painful blend of formality and reproach. "You are the Prime Minister of Free India. Can you reconcile it with your conscience that an Indian citizen is in jail in Jammu and Kashmir for the crime of entering his own country without a permit?" Nehru replies in careful legalistic language. He explains that Kashmir has its own government, its own constitution, its own powers under Article 370. Delhi cannot interfere in every arrest. The law must take its course. Behind those sentences lies a deeper conflict. For Nehru, to override Kashmir's autonomy now, under pressure from a rival, would be to admit that the entire special arrangement is a mistake. For Mukherjee, to accept this argument is to admit that his own idea of one nation, one constitution, one flag is a slogan, not a reality. The bars on the windows are not just metal, they are the visible form of an invisible argument. Outside, the clock is ticking louder than either man realizes. Every day that Mukherjee remains in jail, his stature among Jana Sangh supporters grows. Posters appear across North India, his face behind stylized bars, the slogan, "Free Syama Prasad, Free Kashmir from Permit Raj." Student marches swell in Delhi, Amritsar, Lucknow. Praja Parishad activists in Jammu court lathicharge and arrest, shouting his name. The rivalry with Nehru, once confined to editorials and parliamentary debates, now spills into the streets. Nehru's government is accused of persecuting a patriot, of siding with Sheikh Abdullah's regime against a national leader. Government supporters reply that Mukherjee is playing with communal fire, endangering India's reputation in the world, giving ammunition to Pakistan. Every headline that mentions his detention is another cut in Nehru's carefully managed image of a rational, united republic. And inside that small room in Srinagar, the man at the center of this storm is fighting a more immediate enemy, his own failing body. He begins to complain of pain in his chest, difficulty breathing, bouts of fever. Doctors from the state government visit, examine him, prescribe medicines. He is shifted from jail to the nursing home of the government hospital in Srinagar. The room is cold, the sheets thin, the sounds of the hospital. A clatter of metal trays, the murmur of nurses, the occasional cry of a patient drifting in and out of his exhausted consciousness. He asked to be moved to an outside hospital, or at least to be allowed treatment by doctors of his choice. Correspondence flies back and forth. Promises are made, delayed, diluted. Time, which he had challenged so boldly by coming here, is now closing in. The final descent is brutal in its speed. On the night of 22nd June 1953, he is reported to be in distress. He experiences acute chest pain, restlessness, difficulty breathing. In the early hours of 23rd June, he is given an injection, variously described later as a sedative or penicillin-based medication. What exactly was administered, in what quantity, and with what monitoring, will become the subject of endless controversy. What is certain is this. In that small hospital room under the dim glow of a bulb, Syama Prasad Mukherjee's heart begins to fail. By morning, the news leaks out in broken whispers along the hospital corridors. By late morning, official confirmation arrives. He is dead. Age, 52. Cause, according to the government, heart failure. A man who strode into Kashmir to challenge a line on a map leaves it as a body on a stretcher, shrouded in white. The shock hits Delhi like a physical blow. In Parliament, members sit in stunned silence as the announcement is made. Nehru's face is described by witnesses as drawn, somber, almost ashen. Publicly, he offers condolences, pays tribute to Mukherjee's abilities, his patriotism, the sincerity of his convictions. He insists that there was no ill will, that differences of opinion never touched personal respect. Privately, he is under siege. Within hours, Jana Sangh and Praja Parishad leaders are accusing the Jammu and Kashmir government of negligence, even murder by carelessness. Why was a man with known health issues kept in a place with inadequately equipped facilities? Why were requests for outside medical examination brushed aside? Why, above all, was there no transparent, independent inquiry planned from the moment his condition worsened? The most devastating voice is not that of a political opponent, but of a mother. Mukherjee's mother, Jagmaya Devi, writes an anguished letter demanding a judicial inquiry. She had given a son to the freedom struggle once, when he stood against the British. Now she has lost that same son in an Indian jail. Nehru, defensive and weary, resists a formal judicial probe. He cites reports from doctors, statements from the state government, argues that there is no evidence of foul play. To many, that sounds like evasion. The rivalry that began in policy debates now extends into memory itself. One side remembers a prime minister who would not bend even to investigate the death of his most formidable critic. The other remembers a leader forced to balance law, federal arrangements, and the dangerous game of Kashmir politics under impossible pressure. The truth of those last medical hours in Srinagar becomes a fog in which accusations and counter-accusations swirl. What penetrates that fog for millions is one image: an Indian patriot going into custody in his own country and never coming out alive. His body is brought back to Calcutta. On the streets, hundreds of thousands pour out. Workers, students, refugees from East Bengal with faces lined by hunger and loss, old colleagues from university days, young Jana Sangh cadres in ill-fitting kurtis. The funeral procession moves like a slow, grieving river through the city he loved and fought for. Above the crowd, two portraits sometimes bob side by side on posters and banners. On one, Syama Prasad Mukherjee. On the other, Jawaharlal Nehru. They are no longer two living men arguing across a cabinet table or a parliamentary aisle. They have become competing visions, symbols. One, the suave internationalist with roses in his buttonhole and plans for dams and steel mills. The other, the sharp-tongued nationalist who died in custody over a disputed border and a clause in the Constitution. It feels in that moment as if Nehru has won the immediate political battle. He is still prime minister with an overwhelming majority, and lost something less visible but equally important, the narrative of sacrifice. Because in politics, martyrdom has a strange power. It freezes a person at the moment of maximum conviction and maximum vulnerability. It allows their followers to say, decades later, "We did not just argue for this cause. We bled for it, we died for it." Mukherjee's grave has hardly cooled when that process begins. Inside the small, battered offices of the Bharatiya Jana Sangh, there is grief and fear. Their founder is gone. Their representation in parliament is tiny. Their organization is fragile, stretched thin by limited funds and volunteer labor. It could easily end here as one more footnote in the crowded margins of India's early elections. But death has given them something they did not have before, a martyr figure whose story is simple enough to inspire and complex enough to fascinate. He was a successful academic, they remind themselves, who left the safety of the university for politics. A cabinet minister, they say, who resigned on principle rather than toe a line he considered immoral. A national leader, they insist, who went to jail not under the British but under a special law in free India and died there. They build an entire vocabulary of struggle around his last campaign. Every rally against Article 370 in the years to come carries his slogan. Every Janasang office hangs his portrait. Every young worker is told the story of the train to Jammu, the arrest at Lakhanpur, the final days in Srinagar hospital. Over the next decade, under leaders like Deen Dayal Upadhyaya, the party slowly digs its roots deeper. Municipal boards here, state assemblies there. Gradual gains in North Indian cities, among traders, refugees, lower middle-class families who feel left out of Congress's rhetoric of planning and progress. Nehru, meanwhile, continues to tower over the national scene. But something curious happens. In August 1953, barely 2 months after Mukherjee's death, Sheikh Abdullah is dismissed and arrested by the very Indian government that had argued that Kashmir's special status must be respected. The man in whose jail Mukherjee died is removed by the man who resisted interfering for fear of setting a bad precedent. For Janasang workers, the twist is almost too rich in irony. They whisper, if Syama Prasad had lived just a few months longer, he would have seen Nehru forced to act in Kashmir after all. History does not bend itself to clean moral arcs, but this proximity of dates, death in June, dismissal in August, feeds a powerful narrative. Mukherjee died demanding a firmer stand on Kashmir. Within weeks, Nehru took the very sort of firm step he had resisted while Mukherjee lived. The rivalry has outlived the rival. As the decades roll on, the world changes around the argument they began. Nehru dies in 1964, mourned across continents, his portrait in almost every government office. India passes through wars, famines, the Green Revolution, political splits, the emergency. Janasang merges into the Janata Party in 1977, then is reborn in a new form in 1980, the Bharatiya Janata Party, BJP, a new generation, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, Lal Krishna Advani and others, take the stage. They make new speeches, fight new elections, ride new waves of social churn. But every time Kashmir or Article 370 or the idea of cultural nationalism comes up, they reach back, like a hand groping for a root, in the dark, and find Syama Prasad Mukherjee. Vajpayee in Parliament recalls his teacher and party founder with a mixture of affection and sharpness. Advani, on yatra after yatra, invokes the man who died in Srinagar as proof that their cause is not opportunistic but soaked in sacrifice. For their critics, Mukherjee becomes a more troubling figure, a reminder that the Hindu nationalist movement did not begin with street mobs but with articulate, English-educated, constitutionally literate men arguing in the same halls as Nehru and Patel. For their supporters, he is an early prophet, a man who warned about Pakistan's treatment of minorities, about the dangers of sentimental diplomacy, about the fragility of a special status that keeps a vital border state half detached. The rivalry with Nehru by now has turned into something almost mythic. Whenever India debates secularism versus cultural nationalism, centralized planning versus private initiative, special autonomy versus territorial uniformity, their ghostly silhouettes stand behind the podium. Nehru rose in his buttonhole talking of socialism, alignment and composite culture. Mukherjee, clean-shaven, bespectacled, talking of civilizational continuity, reciprocal minority rights, and integral unity. It is a rivalry conducted now not in letters and cabinet notes, but in election manifestos and television studios. Then, more than 6 decades after that hospital room in Srinagar, the argument descends once more from abstraction into law. On 5th August 2019, the Government of India moves in Parliament to abrogate Article 370 and fully integrate Jammu and Kashmir with the rest of the country. The special status that had once required a permit for Mukherjee to enter is dismantled in a swift, stunning sequence. Presidential orders, parliamentary votes, hours of fierce debate, and then the numbers fall decisively on one side. Supporters erupt in celebration. They burst crackers, dance in the streets, post triumphant messages on social media. On posters and television screens, two faces beam out alongside the current leaders, Syama Prasad Mukherjee and Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. For millions, this moment is presented as the final vindication of Mukherjee's stand, the slogan he shouted in the early 1950s. One all nation, one constitution, one flag, has, they say, finally become reality. His journey to Jammu and his death in Srinagar are replayed in speeches, documentaries, commemorative events. The place where he was arrested, the issues over which he resigned, are now carved into a grand narrative. He died so that India might one day tear up the line that divided Kashmir from the rest of the Union. Critics, of course, challenge this framing. They argue that Nehru's cautiousness was a product of his time, shaped by war, Cold War pressures, and the need to hold a fragile, blood-soaked nation together. They warn that triumphalism about Kashmir risks ignoring the voices and rights of the people who actually live there. But even in their criticism, they acknowledge something. On the question of Kashmir's constitutional place in India, the terms of debate were set very early by the confrontation between Nehru and Mukherjee. One man chose compromise and gradual adjustment. The other chose confrontation and personal risk. History has been kinder in its final verdict on that single issue to the man who died at 52 than to the one who died as prime minister. And yet, to shrink Syama Prasad Mukherjee down to just one clause of the Constitution or one region of the map is to misread his life. He remains a paradox, an unresolved chord in India's political music. A Bengali Bhadralok who defended Hindu interests with a ferocity that made many of his own class uncomfortable. An academic vice-chancellor who walked into the rough and tumble of mass politics and never looked back. A coal and steel policymaker who is today remembered more for flags and borders than for factories and tariffs. He left behind not just institutions and slogans, but questions. How should a secular state respond when minorities are persecuted in a neighboring country? How much autonomy is compatible with unity? Where is the line between safeguarding pluralism and ignoring the fears of a majority that feels besieged? When, if ever, is it right for a politician to walk out of government rather than compromise? His great rival left behind different questions. How far can you trust jaw over war? How quickly can a wounded society be asked to forget its wounds? When does flexibility turn into drift? Their answers clash, their legacies intertwine. In Calcutta, the house where Mukherjee once lived is today a memorial. Visitors walk past glass cases with his books, his fountain pen, his letters. On one wall, his final photograph looks out, eyes tired but intense, at a country still arguing about everything he argued about, nation and region, faith and politics, memory and amnesia. Outside, the traffic roars past, indifferent and alive. Inside, the ticking clock he carried all his life has finally fallen silent. Or has it? Because somewhere in every heated conversation about what India is and what it should be, that unseen stopwatch still seems to be running, the time left to find an answer to the question that burned through his last 70 days. What does it truly mean to belong without condition to one nation is never as long as it looks.